Welcome to Got Grass, conversations with the legends and leaders of bluegrass. You've enjoyed live bluegrass at Guitar Town CT concerts in Hampton, Connecticut since 2008. From Tony Rice, Rouse Stanley, and Doyle Lawson to Tim O'Brien, Sierra Hall, and Billy Strings. Now you can go behind the scenes as we chat with your favorite bluegrass stars. I'm your podcast host, Chris Worth. So I'm happy to welcome Trish Imbrogno to Got Grass today. Welcome.
Thanks, Chris. Happy to be here.
I have to thank your publicist, Heidi, for putting this together. I honestly had never heard of you before she emailed me. I've actually never met her either. Her partner, Luke Bulla, has played here a few times, done concerts here, so it's all through email, but I'm glad she hooked us up today. Glad to find out about you.
Me too.
I think also we know somebody in common. You, Mando Richard,
Oh, yeah, he's great. He moved to Pittsburgh a few years ago, and he's just entrenched himself in our scene. So,
okay, because he used to be, he did radio here in Connecticut on WNHU for many, many years, and we communicated back and forth. I always assumed he lived here, but he lived in Delaware all that time. So I guess now he's in Pittsburgh.
yeah, he moved here. I guess he has grandkids here. Like one of his children maybe is here with the grandkids, and he came to town to be close to them. And he now has 2 radio shows in Pittsburgh and plays all over the place. And yeah, right in 2 feet.
One show was it the Black Diamond show? Was it called or something like that?
Yeah, there's Whiskey Before Breakfast and the Black Diamond radio show.
Yeah, we miss him in Connecticut. He was a big presence here in bluegrass too for many years. But I'm glad he's still active. Tell him I said hi if you ever see him.
I will do that.
So I usually start these interviews by asking a non-music question, which is a day off for you. What's a perfect day off for you like? No music,
Oh boy,
no bass.
a day off. I wish I could just sit on the couch, but that's not my style. So I'm usually catching up on anything that I've put off for the last X number of days. So it can range from, this is going to sound really exciting, right? It can range from anything from, get my dishwasher done, to clean my house, to running errands. But if I have a true day off where all that stuff is done, I'm probably out actually seeing music, which I don't get to do a lot.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, most musicians I've talked to on this say on a day off, I play my instrument. I say, well, I'm trying to find out what you do when you have not just for fun, but that's fun for most musicians. That's what people like to do. I understand.
Yeah, I tend to do that as well, but I'm also the procrastinator of a musician. It's practice is like, oh crap, I have to learn this and pull my instrument out. So, if I have cool things to do on a day off other than play my instrument, I'm probably putting that last on the list.
Gotcha. So most people I've talked to here say that music kind of chose them in their lives. They didn't really have to choose it. They just kind of fell into it, either from family or just hearing it or just love of it. There never was any other alternative to music in their lives. Is that true for you also, or?
No, I have a pretty sordid past with music. When I was young, my grandmother thought I was some sort of piano prodigy. We had a piano in our house. And we also had, back in the 80s, this plastic toy called the Magical Musical Thing. I don't know if you remember that. It was like a long plastic tube with like buttons on it that looked like a piano keyboard, right? So it was like 3 and 2, 3 and and I figured out that the book translated to the piano. I don't know, 6-year-old kids find things like that. And I went over and was playing the piano. So she signed me up for piano lessons, and it was fine for a while. And then I hated it and didn't want to do it. And I was crying. And my mom was like, okay, she's done. It was a good test. Like, we're just going to let her go ride her, big wheel and be a kid. And I never came back to music until I found a clarinet in the attic in fourth or fifth grade, 4th grade. And I was just hidden in the back of our attic, and I took it out and figured out how to put it together. And the little cap that covers the reed, I didn't know what that was, and it didn't come off, so I was just blowing through that. And yeah, it was funny. And then I thought, well, I should take lessons. So I went to the class in school where you can sign up for music. And they spent the first, I don't know, 3 weeks putting the clarinet together. And I was like, I've got this. I put this thing together, last year when I found it. I'm out. So I didn't do that either. And and I tried piano lessons again, like in, sixth grade, and I like didn't really dig it again. Um, and then when I entered middle school, I probably because there was a boy who was a percussionist I thought was cute. So we're gonna say that was my foray into music. And I showed up in the band room with this clarinet. And Fred Dodrell, who was the band director, was like, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to be in the band." He says, "Do you know how to play the clarinet?" And I was like, "Not really. Like, I just figured I could be in the band." And he was like, "No, no." So he said, "Come back at 2 o'clock." And he gave me a book and he actually got me started on the clarinet. And then that was kind of the start. I went from clarinet to pretty closely thereafter bass clarinet, and I picked up the E flat clarinet. And then I would pick up any music, like any musical instrument that was in the band locker. So, I took a bassoon home one summer, and I took home the flute one summer, and I just would play anything I could get my hands on at that point. And then they did concerts for the students, like assemblies, in our middle school. And the orchestra conductor, Bev Schmidt, she would have the orchestra concert, and then she would invite anybody that wanted to play over the summer to come up and get a permission slip. And, you know, you could come in and take lessons and maybe move into the orchestra and that sort of thing. So I thought, I've been playing these wind instruments. Maybe I should move into strings. And because I guess that's a logical move for 13-year-old kids. And I was like, there's a bunch of violins and a bunch of these other things and one bass player. And I was like, unpopular, not a cool kid. And I was like, if I play the bass, people will see me.
Hmm.
Total vanity at age 13. And I went home. My mom didn't know what she was signing, signs the permission slip. When she figured out what a bass was, I thought she was going to kill me, but that's a whole, that's a whole other story. Um, in the first week of the lessons in the summer, I played through the whole book. She gave me like a, method book, and I played cover to cover. And she was like, "Well, what other string instrument do you play?" And I said, "Well, none." And she's like, "Well, I guess you're in the orchestra now." So then, like, after a week of basically playing the bass, I transitioned into the summer orchestra. And so I always say the bass chose me. It was like, "You come over here." Because I mean, I didn't know what it was. It was just the one thing on stage that nobody else played. And then well, in hindsight, I don't think I was that good, but I progressed quickly. I'm not going to say I got good fast because I still don't think I'm that good, but it, you know, it's, it was just a really fast progression with the instrument. And I don't know what it was, but it was the right one.
It's funny you mentioned clarinet because my dad played clarinet in college, and so he had an old clarinet, and my favorite part about it was putting it together too. The wooden, like really taking them, squeaking together, putting the reed in, and like figuring it all out. I took lessons, I think, in fourth grade for a little while. I never really played it, but I remember it was so cool to assemble.
Yeah, and there's that like one little piece of metal you have to line up so the keys, it's it's a fun instrument. I need to buy one so I can try it out again and see if I still have any chops on it.
So I know you had a long career in classical music, and we'll get into that, but it's pretty unusual for a classical player to switch to bluegrass in the middle of their careers. I'm sure you get this question all the time from people, like, what happened? And you probably have a good answer for that question.
Yeah, so, I was playing regionally around Pittsburgh and in orchestras, and then my partner is a fingerpick style guitar player. So he was playing like Mississippi John Hurt and Blind Blake, and um, through some serendipitous events, we started to play together as a duo. But when I say play together as a duo, he was playing and I had like the letters EADG written in front of me so I could remember what order to play them in, right? I'd never played off book. I wasn't a jazz player. I'd never done that. And so we started to gig a little bit. And then this kid who was playing bluegrass around town said, "Oh, you should come to this Wednesday night thing we do." And I was like, whatever. And then every time I would see him, he'd be like, "You should come to that Wednesday night thing we do." So I finally showed up, and it was this like Wednesday night. It wasn't a jam, but they called it a jam. But the band was in the back of this long, skinny bar called the Park House, no amplification, packed. I used to have to carry my bass like over the people to get it in. And I started playing what I thought was bluegrass, but it was more like rock and roll and like jam music with bluegrass instruments. But I didn't really know bluegrass, right? I didn't know that what the genre even was. So I dipped my toe in that way backwards, and then I started to get called for more gigs and
Mm.
more gigs. And what was happening, fast forward a handful of years, was my weekends were filled by the time I would get my orchestral contracts. And I might have one weekend open in, April, and I'd get the contracts in July. And I was like, maybe I'm not doing the right thing with this classical thing
Mm.
over here. And I was having a great time playing this Americana music, right? I didn't really know what it was. I was learning a new style. It was fun. There was like this audience interaction I wasn't getting with classical music. And um, I guess that's maybe what I craved and didn't know it. And I just made the choice that I was going to not play classical music for, in 2019, 2018, 2019, and just do this. And
Mm.
then I got a few calls for classical gigs and I just said no. I was
Mm.
like, I think I'm done. Like, I think that that was something that led me into my music career. And I don't think that was ever, in hindsight, supposed to be my music career.
Mm. I had the great fiddle player Richard Green of C Train and David Grissom and Tony Rice
Yeah.
all on the podcast, and he was talking about he grew up playing violin in California. He was pretty good. But he said I never really liked it. He said I heard Scotty Stoneman playing bluegrass one time, saw him live, lying on his back playing the craziest bluegrass stuff I'd ever heard. And he said that was it for me. I never played classical again. I was totally hooked on him. He's not the only fiddle player I've talked to on this who was also turned on by Scotty Stoneman. Uh, but that was his path. He said, I just never really cared that much for classical. My parents wanted me to do it. I was good at it. I did it dutifully, but it just didn't thrill me.
Yeah, and Chris, I don't know that I knew there was something other than like classical or jazz out there. I went to Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, which was a heavily classical school. They had a great jazz program, but it was very segmented. If you were in the classical track, you were a classical player, and if you were in the jazz track, you were a jazz player. And I did actually try to take some jazz lessons. And I went to the dean and I said, how can I, take one credit of jazz and two credit of classical? And he said, well, you can't do that because of the pay structure. How we pay our, like, basically
Mm.
our professors is they get paid for 3 credits for your major instrument. So you couldn't minor in
Mhm.
another instrument while majoring in the same. It was a whole thing. So I did try to find a new genre, and step out a little bit back when I was still studying the bass, but it just didn't happen. So I guess everything in good time.
Yeah. So you record and perform as under the name of Trish Plays Bass. I'm sure there's a story behind that name too, because obviously you do play bass, but that's kind of cool that you made that your name. What's the story there?
Well, you're one of the few people who sees my last name on the page and can actually say Imbrogno, or Imbrogno is, it's pronounced,
Bronya.
yeah.
Correct
But
pronunciation.
I grew up with it as Imbrogno, so I'm okay with either pronunciation. But normally what I get is Imbruglia, Imbruglia, like it's a stumbly name. So um, people started to call me Trish Plays Bass in Pittsburgh. And there were a lot of people that didn't even know my last name. They were just like, oh, here's Trish Plays Bass. And when I was thinking about I guess a quote unquote brand, or what I was going to call, my Facebook pages and my Instagram pages, I was like, well, it's got to be Trish Plays Bass. And then fast forward to the EP, and I was like, well, it's got to be Trish Plays Bass, because it's fine if it's in print, and someone can see that, maybe search me that way or look me up. But, in something like this where we're just talking and they hear, Trish Imbrogno or Trish Imbrogno, and they're like, is that an E? Is that an I? Is that an L? Like, what is that? So it was literally just out of the last name where, Trish Plays Bass works. So that's what I went with.
It's good. I like it. I mean, it's very catchy and that tells the story. You do play bass.
Correct. Correct.
I guess it is in a sense these days branding. I mean, you think about the names of famous musicians or artists or politicians, and usually the ones you remember are the ones you can just kind of snap off the name. The ones that are complicated, unless they're geniuses, you probably don't remember them. It's like too hard to think of it or pronounce it. Yeah.
Correct. And even with a last name like mine, I still see last names on a page. In Pittsburgh, we have a lot of Polish last names, and I see all those letters and it just looks like an eye chart. I don't know where to start to pronounce it. So wholeheartedly understand where someone sees, a 8+ letter last name. They're not even trying. They're just like, whatever that was.
Wherever you are, yeah. So I was looking at a couple of interviews you did, and I didn't realize that Pittsburgh had such a long-standing and big bluegrass scene. It's very impressive. I jealous.
Yeah, it's the history here is very deep and wide. It goes back with Mac Martin, who started playing in the 40s. And, he had he played until he was like 92 years old. So, he was kind of the first Pittsburgh centric kind of nationally known musician, that he had kind of had a name in the national scene. And, I don't know if having that. Now, he did live about an hour outside of Pittsburgh in Greensburg, but he was in our region. So I don't know if that helped kind of like form our scene here, or if it just kind of happened, you have a musician playing a lot, and then you have other musicians that hear and see that and pick up the genre. But yeah, we had the Elizabeth Moose, which brought everybody through the area, everybody. I saw some of those schedules and man, I was so jealous, Tony Rice and David Greer and, unbelievable, just unbelievable musicians coming through there. And it was a moose club in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. And then, we had Mountaintop Festival out in Tarentum, and we had Beaver Valley Festival, like, um, out west of the city, and just all of this music around here, some of which was happening when I had moved to Pittsburgh. But again, back to I didn't know what bluegrass was. So now I'm really kicking myself that, in the mid to late 90s, that stuff was actually still in pretty full force, and could have seen some of the greats and didn't even know it was here.
Yeah. We have a small scene in Connecticut. I've been putting on bluegrass concerts for 18 years here. And actually, Tony Rice was the first band that played at our concerts, and he played a few times. David Greer's played here quite a few times. But it's a very small scene in Connecticut. There's some jams. I lead some. There's some around, but I think it was much bigger 40 years ago than it is now. Sounds like Pittsburgh has maintained a pretty strong bluegrass scene.
Yeah, we had a dip, in the probably early 2000s, and there was really one long-standing jam that was happening, and that was the Starlight on Tuesday nights, and that was basically where you went. Like when I started to get into playing this, if I wanted to go to a jam, Starlight was kind of it. And in the past, well, probably since like 2019, and then COVID hit, so we'll pretend 2019 extends into the current time. Um, the jam started to pick up. We started to host some Sunday jams, and there's always kind of a performance scene here. There were always some bands playing. Some of the older players have not stopped playing. Some younger players were coming up. But honestly, in the last 4-ish years, and I'm gonna attribute it to Billy Strings. We have a lot of young players. They're out picking. There's jams almost every day of the week here, and there's a lot of young faces. And for better or worse, they're at least coming into the genre through something that is someone who does love and preserve the tradition, right? For whatever else he's doing, I don't mind it at all. I'm a deadhead, so good for him for hooking all those people in and loving the music. So, but anything that happens that can boost the scene, I'm all for, and we've seen it in the city just kind of explode. So,
Well, I was going to get to Billy Strings because it's hard not to talk about Billy Strings these days. And I think honestly, he really is a traditional player at heart, and he plays all these old songs, even though he has all these pedals and goes off onto these long tangents. But he plays Doc Watson, Stanley Brothers, all this stuff. So people are getting a good introduction to the wide range of bluegrass through him. I've heard a few people I don't know if they're resentful, a little jealous, older players saying, I play my whole life. I play for 150 people. He comes in and plays for 20,000, and but it's good for the music. I think Bill Monroe would have approved because I think, without popularity, the music just kind of becomes like this little niche thing that nobody knows about.
Correct. And there's pretty parallel paths in classical music and bluegrass when you look at the audience, right? There's a lot of white hair, there's a lot of people that are like, it has to be this way, it has to be the way the classics were done. And, you know, I think it really shoots both genres in the foot to not be welcoming to try something else, right? Whether that's a different venue or a different style or just uh, whatever it is. But to your point, the fact that Billy String's band can unplug and walk around a single mic and do it correctly. A lot of other jam bands can't do that, jam grass bands. Go ahead and unplug your pedals and see what you sound like. So to me, like if someone is going to lead that pack, I think he's the perfect guy to do it.
Yeah. I mean, don't forget, especially older players, I think that Bill Monroe, when he started playing with Earl Scruggs, that was revolutionary. And a lot of old time front porch pickers probably said, "What is this junk he's doing? This is craziness." So, I mean, they forget the tradition of innovation in bluegrass is long standing, and you have to accept that. You can't just sing Stanley Brothers songs the rest of your life and that's it because the music will die that way.
Right. And it happened in the 70s with Newgrass Revival. I mean, what a bunch of hacks those guys were, right? I mean, they're some of the best players on the planet and they were getting booed off the stage at festivals. Like, eh, so
Yeah.
you think the genre might learn from its historic maybe falters, but I I feel like we have a little bit. And Billy's keynote at IBMA this year was great if you haven't heard it. But
I did hear it. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, he really values the tradition. And that's, I think, if people do listen with ears like that and hear what he's doing from that angle, he really does preserve what's going on and just takes it a little different direction. But again, I don't know, like when I play gigs, we throw in a tune or two that people know, right? Because you can't just play 3 hours of music that you like and think that people are just going to show up and listen, right? Like, I mean, there's a point where you have to build your audience in a way that keeps them interested, at
Mhm.
least a little bit, to say, well, I liked these handful of tunes you did. What were those other ones you were doing? Right? To
Mhm.
help kind of bring them in and educate them about what the music is. So, I feel like you have to do that to a point. Otherwise, you're going to play to 50 people your whole life. So,
I remember an interview with Paul McCartney on YouTube or something, and he was asked about, why do you play the same songs over and over? He said, "Look, I went to see Tom Petty a while back. I want to hear all his hits. I don't want to hear anything that I'm not familiar with." And this is McCartney. So he says, "I feel like my audience deserves to hear the music that they love." And
right.
that's, you can put new stuff in, but you play a whole show, as you say, of, 24 brand new songs. A lot of people are going to walk out at break because it's just too much, too unfamiliar, you know?
Right. And I play in a pretty traditional group in Pittsburgh called Moose Lodge Revival. And, it's pretty straight standard bluegrass. I
Mm.
also play in another band called the Sweaty Already String Band. In that band, I sing She Works Hard for the Money, like an 80s pop song. And we throw in Tom Waits and, we mix in tunes that people know because it's, again, to the point of people hearing something that's what they like, but in a different style.
And I think most people who go to hear live music, the majority of people don't want to go and be stressed out trying to figure out what new stuff. They want to just go and relax and enjoy themselves. I mean, some people will go hear like crazy jazz like me and, analyze everything and be cool about it. But most people, I think, just want to have a good time. And you have to have some familiar stuff, I think, mix it in. You have to tell jokes. You have to be entertained. You have to entertain.
Right, right. And that's, I feel like musicians listen to music very differently than your layman on the street. It's just people want to hear something that's interesting, but not something they need a calculator to figure out, right? Like
Hmm.
I like heavy classical music. I want to hear Bruckner and I want to hear Stravinsky and I want to hear the stuff that's really intricate and complicated. I don't want Strauss waltzes, but guess what sells out? Strauss waltzes. You know what I mean? Like, so it's, music for musicians is very different than music for the public.
Yeah. I want to talk about the song. I heard you mention that the song, the Fiddle to and Cherokee Shuffle, is kind of like the Pittsburgh national anthem. It's very popular here too at jams, but there are a lot of different ways of playing it. And I was wondering, there's that six minor chord in there, and like when in Pittsburgh, is there a standard way to play the song chord wise? Because I hear it played, sometimes the six minor early on, sometimes only later in the tune. And how do you guys do it?
So we do it. There's a 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 4 up to the six minor. So the six minor happens in the first part of the A part.
Yeah.
And I think where a lot of the discrepancy happens is the last phrase of the B part. Does it go six minor 5 1 or does it just go six minor 1? And we do, or sorry, does it go six minor 4 5 1 or six minor 5 1? And we just do six minor 5 1.
Yeah.
So we don't put a four at the end of the B part. So that's our way of doing it.
That sounds like the right way to do it. I don't know. I never played
I
it.
agree. I think that's how I've heard it done most often with other, recordings. And so however it came to be here, whoever brought it into the circle and kept playing it, played it
Mhm.
with that six minor 5 1.
Yeah. So on your new album, you sing a few songs, one of which is the Stanley Brothers "Think of What You've Done," which is a song I love. Was not that familiar with it until I actually heard your version of it recently and said, "Whoa, that's a great song. I have to learn." Um, I think it's one of those classic songs that often get overplayed. Like a lot of bluegrass gets overplayed. People just playing too much, too busy. And I was going to ask you about the transition between classical and bluegrass. Um, I guess my question is, from going from classical music, where you're playing every note written and you're playing a lot, to playing bluegrass, where you're really having to cut back your notes, I guess. Was that one of the hardest things to kind of adjust to? Was the quietness of bluegrass, I guess, or
The not busyness of the bass in
unbusyness?
bluegrass. Yeah, yeah, that was a huge transition. I mean, I know where every note is from the nut to the end of the bridge, right? Probably less towards the end of the bridge these days. But I'd go to that Starlight Jam, and boy, those guys would just they'd side eye me. I'm playing all over the bass, And what are you doing? Like that's not your job, and it's not your role in this music. It took a while. I'm still a pretty busy player, I think, compared to some other bluegrass players. But I like to think I've become a more tasteful busy player than I was at the start, where I was just playing all over the bass. And nobody ever said to me, "Stop doing that." Actually, one time, but like long after I had been doing it, someone just was like, "Just stop doing that." And I was like, "What?" And they're like, "Playing all those notes. Why are you doing that?" I was like, "I don't know. Like, should I not play them?" And then they were like, "You need to go listen to some bluegrass." Because at the time, I was playing jam grass. I was just playing whatever fit what I wanted to play, and then it was a bunch of young kids banging on instruments, and they happened to be acoustic instruments that made up a bluegrass band. So, I definitely backed into bluegrass, to the traditional bluegrass, and it was probably around 2018 when I started to really listen to the Stanley Brothers and um, it, it- the classics. Jimmy Martin. I didn't even know who Jimmy Martin was until 2018, let alone have listened to that leading up to that point. And then, I was listening to Old and in the Way. I didn't know that was bluegrass. I thought that was Jerry's acoustic project. I Nope. So I definitely backed into the traditional side of bluegrass. So once I started to listen, I was like, oh, yeah, I'm definitely not doing what I should be doing if I'm going to play this style of music. So um, it was a little listening, and then that one person saying, "Stop doing that." That got me off the path, but it still took a long time to stop doing it.
Right. Your instinct was to play music, play notes.
Play
That's what you're taught
notes,
to do, right?
right?
Your instrument, you play.
Well, and they're written on the page, right? Well, what do you do when you take that page away? That was also a huge transition. Is well, it's E. Well, do I just play E? Do I play E? Oh, I can play all the notes in that E scale. Okay, well, maybe not. But then, so it. I think a lot of the notiness to start was getting around the changes where I just was uncertain of what to play, and then it stuck, and then I had to erase a lot of that
Hmm.
between the notes, between the chord changes.
Yeah. I had at one point Todd Phillips on this podcast, and I asked Todd, I said, as you get older as a player, what are you trying to do now? What are you thinking about? He goes, well, I listened to my early stuff when I played with Dave Grisman. I was playing so many notes. He said, I've just learned to play less, but try and just play the right notes. He said that was his way of putting it, which I thought was a pretty good way of putting it.
Well, that's my goal is to play the correct the right notes in the right time in the right place, right? And I think that's what we all strive to do. But I feel like as a bass player, that's even more important than any other instrument in the ensemble is to really build that foundation. I mean, because if I'm not playing the right note, I can change the whole structure of the chord. So it's very important for me to have my ducks in a row. And honestly, to Todd Phillips' point, playing a lot less is actually a little harder that I feel like than it is to just play all over the net because you really have to think about your placement and your note choice. And I'm getting a little better at that, I think. I
It's
think.
kind of ironic because the bass, which plays the fewest notes of anybody in bluegrass, but yet if you play one wrong, it's it's noticed more than any other instrument.
It sure is. Go ahead and bang a D over an A chord and see what happens. Like it's not that I've ever done that. But yeah, I mean it's definitely, I've listened back. We record a lot of our shows and what you think goes well on stage maybe doesn't, and what you think went badly maybe doesn't. And man, like I've come off shows thinking, man, that was so good. And I listen back to the recording and I'm like, what was I doing? I wasn't even playing in the right key. It sounds sounds like, so it's like, you try something new and, you maybe shit the bed a little bit but you learn from
Mhm.
it if you go back and listen to it. So it's, definitely maybe you think you're taking two steps forward, but you took one back and then you got to get one ahead. So it's a consistent, well, progression. We're not going to say struggle, but to learn from maybe the missteps you make as a bass player and put
Hmm.
them in the right place moving forward.
I've heard many musicians that I've talked to on this podcast say the same thing that they think they had a terrible night and they hear the recording and said, "Oh, I was actually pretty good," or the opposite, and they think they were playing great and they hear the recording and said, "Oh, geez, what was I doing?" So I guess it's hard to tell in the moment, really, how it all sounds.
Yeah, what feels
Player.
good, what felt good maybe didn't sound good, and that's a hard like trying to let go as you're playing and just play, but also still being cognizant of what you're playing without it getting too much in your head. Um, when you figure that out, I feel like you've hit the mecca of playing music. I still get a little in my own head when I'm thinking about it. Like it's, you know, oh, should I have done that there? Oh, no, 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 do it over here. Oh, so
Yeah. Um, so in terms of playing the bass, I guess you've worked with Missy Rand some in like did
yeah,
lessons or just play with
yeah.
her?
Well, so I've taken a lot of her like online lessons. So when I started to get a little more serious and think I should probably start working with somebody. The first person I worked with ever was Alan Bartram. I went to Delfest Academy, um, again, kind of having not knowing at the time a lot of bluegrass, and somebody recommended I go, and I went, and that was like my first kind of deep dive into traditional bluegrass, right? So you have, the Gibson brothers were there teaching that year, and you have all the McCurrys, and Alan's one of my favorite bass players. Like that's what I strive to play. He plays exactly what he needs to play when he needs to play it. Nothing's fancy. Like it is just really solid, good bluegrass bass playing. Um, and then from there, I was like, well, I need to probably study with someone, but nobody, Pittsburgh's not really close to Nashville. It's not really close to any place where bluegrass bass players live. And I did ask, there used to be a band in town called the Allegheny Drifters, and Karen Artis. She has a beautiful voice, and she's a great bass player. And I saw it. I was like, "Do you teach?" She's like, "No." I'm like, "Do you coach?" Did I use the wrong? She was like, "No." I was like, "Okay, so that's my local connection out the door." And then I found the Artist Work series, and I found Missy, and I knew who Missy was, and I was like, I should take these lessons. So, you know, I I'm not a huge exchanger of the videos. I always say I'm her most delinquent student ever. But I'm actually working on this stuff in the background. So the exchanges were great when we had them. So the feedback was always amazing. And then again, to build upon that and then to go back into even just the beginner level of her classes and take now what I know back into that beginner level. And every year I still sign up for her class and I dig back in and, work on some more stuff that she has in there that, because where I am here now is way different than where I was when I started those classes. So to go back to the basics, and I still pull out my classical books, my basic 101 Samandal book and work on that stuff too, because, as you progress as a player, you pick up a little more and you're thinking about things a little differently than you were back when you were doing that stuff. So I do like to go back to those basics and dig
Mhm.
in. So, but yeah, she was my first like consistent bass teacher, but it was digital in our,
Mhm.
you know.
So in terms of technique, and I'm not talking about bowing. I'm talking about plucking technique on
Hmm.
the bass, the double bass. Why do they call it the double bass as opposed to just
Well, it's an octave lower than your cello in
yeah,
those lines. I'm going to make this up. I think it's because those lines often double, but they're lower. So it's a double
right?
bass. Your bass is technically your cello and then you're below it, but it's also the string bass and the upright bass and the doghouse bass and it's the only instrument that has 42 names. So, and also it's the only instrument that is not consistently a viol shape, like violins, violas, cellos, 99% of them look alike. And you go start looking at basses and you have flat backs and round backs and the French sloped shoulders and skinnier basses and fatter basses and the more Italian shaped, wider, broader upper bouts. So I mean, we're also the only instrument that isn't consistently built the same way
Mhm.
over time.
Okay, so that answers that question. So in terms of classical bass playing versus bluegrass bass playing, what is like? Can you just talk about the difference between how you pluck, or is there any difference? You still pluck a the same way on a classical piece or a bluegrass, or is it different?
Uh, yeah, yes and no. So like, when you're playing with your bow and then you get to a pizzicato section, what you
Hmm.
do is you flip your bow into your hand and you use kind of these two fingers, but you still have this bow in your hand, right? So you're plucking much more of kind of an up versus a little bit of over, but like you're more of like a bloop 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 kind of upstroke. And then you also have a bar talk pit, so you might pull it up and let it slap the string, or like in Chike 4, the whole second movement is pizzicato. So you actually put your bow down and you're using both fingers like you would a jazz player. But um, when I put the bow down completely and I was starting to just play with
Hmm.
pizzicato, I wasn't quite sure what to do with this hand because I'm used to having a bow in my hand, and like I look at old pictures and I'm very much like on top of the string and I've got my thumb anchored on the fingerboard, and so to me it's very different, because you know finding the right position of your hand and how do you get a consistent sound on those strings, right? I still work on 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 1 1 1 2 2, and then I cross strings and do that to try to get the most clean, consistent sound I can. I played with a bow for 30 years and I've only been without a bow for, I don't know, 15. So I feel like that right hand technique, much like your bow hand, can make or break your sound. So, a lot of people play with more of a flat hand and some people play more of a tilted hand and a lot of people play with two fingers. I think it's a personal preference. And I prefer to play, you know, I play a little more on the side of my finger, but not like the whole side of my finger, like a lot of bass players do. I'm much more of a tip side player. Um, and I tend to use both of my fingers versus two at the same
Yeah.
time. I just feel like I can get a more consistent sound, whether it's a slow or a fast tune, than pulling with both. I also like my fingers are kind of not the same height, so like I feel like one's hitting differently when I'm using, you know, two versus one, and then my position of my arm has to change. Um, yeah, so it's long way to say, yeah, it's very different, and I still am figuring it out. I took a lesson with a jazz player in Pittsburgh because I couldn't get the E string. I was like, how do I play the E string? Like I couldn't get a good sound, and he's like, Trish, it's like turning a key. And I was like, oh my God, you're right. Like, so it was like one word in that little bit of motion changed, the tone of my E string playing. So you figure it out, I guess, but everybody's going to do it differently.
So it's kind of like holding a pick, playing guitar, mandolin. I mean, you have people telling you have to do it this way and that way, but everybody does it differently. And it's kind of like whatever works for you, because I see people like David Greer play guitar, and no way in hell could I hold a pick the way he does and play. It doesn't even make sense to me. But everyone, makes it work to the best of their ability based on what's
Right.
comfortable. Yes.
Well, right. I mean, in the whole thing, I mean, even with your pick is good tone, right? Like you want to get like the best sound out of your instrument. Same with that right hand pizzicato. And my hands are way smaller than some people's and way bigger than other people's. So the way
Mm.
we all get around that instrument, especially because it's like the size of a human, is I think a very personal thing to your own relationship with your instrument. Like how do you wrangle this thing that's so big and make it work for you? And that's again with classical playing too. It's, holding your bow is very different for each person. Now there's a standard technique, but some people hold it a little higher or lower, put their thumb more in the frog or more on top of the frog. So it just again what works for you to get the best sound,
Hmm.
out of the instrument.
What's the deal with gut strings? Do you play gut strings on your bluegrass bass, or you
Well, Chris, funny you should ask that. I own a set of gut strings, and I actually bought this weird little half-size bass to put gut strings on, I don't know, 6 years ago.
hmm
And they're still in the back pocket of that bass. And I swear I'm not a slapper. And I think I have a hard time with the steel string and the slap because for so many years, you're not going to win that audition if that string hits the fingerboard. If you get, that is not a noise an orchestral player makes. And I think if I get those gut strings on that bass, I can learn to slap. So I need to take the gut strings out and put them on the bass and learn to slap. But when I pick up a bass with gut strings, they're like the springiness of them, and this is also like a nylon core string that's kind of replicates a nylon core string, steel string that replicates that gut. They're like that. They're so responsive, and they spring back so quickly that your technique has to be a little bit different than like I'm used to pulling across those steel strings because the tension's so much harder than a gut or a nylon core. So um, I love the sound of a gut string. I don't think I'm very good at playing gut string or like the gut feel string. Um, and I should be better at it. So maybe you've sparked me to put them on and get better at it.
I have a friend I play with who plays. He usually has at least one or two gut strings in the bass. He says, well, they're very expensive, they wear out, and he does a lot of slap bass, and he's that's part of his style. So for him, he says, oh, these are the best sounding things you could ever have. But of course, that's what he's used to. So I was just wondering if that's a common thing in bluegrass bass, or
It's so a lot of people do play those top two as gut and the bottom two as steel.
right.
And I'm not sure why. I'm not sure if it's a sound thing or a cost thing or a feel thing. Um, but they are crazy expensive. Steel bass strings already are $300 a set, and
Right.
add a little more on that for some guts, um, and
Yeah,
they stretch and
it becomes
break
a big
and
expense. Yeah. Right.
yeah.
Was there a bluegrass bass player that when you kind of discovered bluegrass and started playing it, was there any bass player that you thought, wow, that's who I want to be like? like guitar players. With I heard Tony Rice or mandolin players, I heard Bill Monroe. I had to play like him. Was there a bass player that you heard a lot?
Yeah, so when I started to actually listen to the bass players, um, and somebody asked me one time, well, what bass players do you listen to? And do you want to sound like? And I said, I don't know. I thought the person was going to strangle me, right? And they're like, you don't know who you're listening to? And I said, no. So then started to pay attention. And with the digital age, it's a little trickier to figure out who's playing bass on a certain track, and it takes a lot of research. But I mean, I think every bass player loves Bob Moore's playing, right? And he's not strictly a bluegrass guy, but much more the country sound. But man, his playing is amazing. And most of the other folks I listen to and have listened to are alive. I love Todd Phillips playing. Alan Bartram's one of my favorite bass players. Um, it's Mike Bubb. I just saw Mike Bubb last week. I mean, like again, perfect placement of the note, the right note at the right time. It's, some those are some of my favorite folks. Travis Book with the String Dusters. I love his playing too. So, most of the folks I'm listening to now are alive and were alive as I got into it. Bob Moore was still alive when I started to pick him out of the recordings. So, and, Roy Husky Jr. and some, obviously like the guys who are on all the recordings. And Dell's brother, Del McCurry's brother, Jerry McCurry. Um, what a unique style he has. It's something I'll never sound like him. Um, but when you hear him and Dell play together, it's kind of magical. So um, I don't think there's anybody I ever like really heard and was like, "Ooh, I have to do that." And I, I really love Chris Wood from the Wood Brothers and Medeski Martin Wood. I love his playing, and for a long time, I wanted to play like that guy. This is, long before the bluegrass days, and I wanted to be Chris Wood, and I'd get so pissed off that I couldn't do what he was doing. So I think I've made a conscious decision to not ever want to exactly play like somebody, right? Like pick up some of what they do and kind of emulate what they do, but not to try to be that person. So
Yeah, makes sense. So after playing the bass for a long time, what do you still struggle with the most as a bassist on the instrument?
yes.
Yes, you struggle with
Yes.
it. That's
No,
yes, okay.
no, I mean there's a lot of stuff. So it varies, right? So my right hand technique I feel like is probably the weakest thing in all of my playing. Um, it's getting better, it's getting more solid, but I find the inconsistencies in it. So I think that right hand is probably the biggest struggle. And the slap thing, man, I try and I practice and I want to do it, and there's just some break there. Um, I'm also not a great soloist. I'm not good at taking a solo because I've never really had to do that. So that to me is the biggest struggle. I think outside of a technique piece of the puzzle is someone looks at me to take a break and I just go like this and like, nah, that's not my job. I'm here to lay your foundation. You guys take all the breaks, but I'm getting better. I do take a few breaks here and there. I work on it more, and I sign up for, things I see online that are building a bass break and talk to some jazz players, but it's a little different in jazz than it is bluegrass. But, I'm learning those melodies and okay, now I know the melody. How do I make it more interesting? And so I think that's the biggest struggle right there is doing something that's not just the melody that's interesting, that also isn't just a walking bass line and calling it a solo.
That's interesting because a lot of bass players don't want to play solos. I'm usually at a jam, I'll nod to the bass player and they'll shake their head and we'll just stop playing and just you have to play because we're not playing. And they usually find something to play. But do you ever do a bowed solo, or do you always pizzicato solos in bluegrass?
I used to bow solos, and then when I took my focus, like I wanted to really spend time like on pizzicato right hand. I don't play a lot with my bow anymore, so I've inadvertently like stopped taking bow solos because I feel like it doesn't sound as good as it used to. So when when I pick up the bow and work on stuff, it's definitely much more of a long bow feel than a solo that I'd play a solo on. So um, I used to, but not anymore.
Yeah. I grew up listening to jazz. I didn't get into bluegrass till much later in my life. And my wife and I go hear bluegrass, I go hear jazz all the time, top players. And a lot of jazz bass players do play bowed solos now. Um, and when they're good, they're unbelievable. But a bow solo that's not quite making it is, to me, one of the worst sounds in music. It's like it's tough to
And
make it
it's
really sound good and melodic, and I don't know.
when it's really unforgiving, like the bow is unforgiving, right? So
Word.
you hear much more of the intonation if it's out with the bow. If you're scratching or like again, you don't have a good bow technique, then you have that, and then it can be a whole like shit storm of bad, but it also can be really freaking good too. Like that's kind of it too. Like there's a lot of players out there right now that they do it way better than I do. I'm gonna let them do it. Like
Mhm.
so.
Yeah. I mean, I guess being a classically trained player, your left-hand intonation is probably, I mean, you're used to playing the notes where they're supposed to be on all four strings, all the way up and down the neck. So that's probably easier for you and more natural, not worry about. Whereas the other hand is, like you say, the bow is go on your own there.
Yeah, the left hand is, I mean, I can tell you like right there's first position, like next to my eye, so and I measure back, it's all the same. I use all the same left hand technique that I've always used my entire playing career. Um, just obviously now employing it in a little different way. But yeah, like I still have the same hand shape and I do a little more, I call it lobster clawing. Like when you see bass players that just kind of do this, like if I'm playing in B a lot, like you'll see me just kind of break down my tech, the hand shape and just get through it because it's a lot of stress on the hand. Or, if I'm playing a lot of low G, you might see me kind of close that hand, but the shape comes right back. I think it's so ingrained in my body and in that muscle memory that it's not going anywhere.
Yeah. Is there a procedure for tuning a bass which is unique to you, or do people tune them all the same way? They could just tune one string electronically and then tune the other three to it, or how does that generally work?
Um, Now with electronic tuners, I tend to defer to the tuner and then just check, does it sound right? Well-tempered tuning is, you got to make sure you're in with yourself because the tuner isn't always right. Um, but I used to tune my A string and then tune harmonics off of it, but I always use my bow. So it's a little hard to hit harmonics and really be able to hear the intonation to tune the bass if you're not using a bow. Um, and I'm a work smarter, not harder kind of person. So if I have that tuner there, I just tune. I don't tune in any particular order. I tend to do, G down to E and
Mhm.
then double check the G and then double check everything else because they do kind of go in and out as you're tuning, um, especially with weather. Right now in Pittsburgh, it's uh, well, the day started at 60 degrees and it's going to end at 30 degrees. So, it's not a good time of the year for wooden instruments in any, sense of the word. So you know, if it's a pretty consistent time of year, I pretty much tune across once and it holds
Yeah.
for the whole show.
How do you humidify the bass? Do you have it in a room that's, a certain humidity, or do you have something you stick inside of it, or how does that work for basses?
So I used to put dampets in the F
Mm-hmm.
holes, which are those kind of rubber things with the sponge in them.
Mm-hmm.
And the luthier I work with, who's amazing, he was like, stop. He's like, if you don't get them dry enough, they're going to drip into your bottom bout and they're going to wear that wood out and you're going to get a crack. And, and I've had cracks on my bottom bouts, probably from years of not squeezing out my sponges. So we have in our house, Pete's a guitar player and a banjo player. So, um, we have a lot of expensive wood in here. So we have one room that we hang actually curtains up and turn it kind of into a humidor, starting actually about 2 weeks ago when the humidity first dropped here. And we have two humidifiers that run pretty much nonstop. We try to keep it at least 40% all winter.
Yeah.
And just, yeah.
So this is more of a philosophical question, but was there ever a point in your life when you kind of considered giving up music, you were discouraged or things weren't going your way, and you said, maybe I'll just do something else with my life? Did that ever happen to you?
Yeah, I went to grad school for arts administration, like nonprofit arts management, basically. So when I came out of undergrad, again, I was playing classically. I was like, I don't think I'm going to win a job. I, I owed Duquesne a lot of money. I'm like, what am I going to do? So I went to grad school and studied, basically business. And I worked in the nonprofit arts for a few years. I was still playing the bass a little bit. Um, but when I moved back to Pittsburgh and I took a job in the nonprofit arts, I couldn't play anymore. I didn't have any more time. And I
Mm.
spent probably 4 years where I'd take my bass out of the corner and I would tune it. And when I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like I yearned to play music, you know? So when I quit that job, ever since, like it's been, you know, even if I'm working and playing, that job knows that at 5 o'clock we're done, and
Mhm.
and music sits. So um yeah, it's, I don't know too many people. I'm not one of those people that can just play music and make a living. So um you know, the day job balances with the job I am funding with my day job. It's something I can't not do. I have to play music. And there was that period where I didn't, and that's when I really realized that there's no point in my life that I'm not going to play music. Um, so I don't know that I ever said I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to throw in the towel. Uh, but the work took over, and but it also opened my eyes to be pretty aware that underlying in my life is music, regardless of what else is going on.
Mhm. Do you remember ever getting any advice from anybody that really stuck with you about playing music or the music business? Or I don't know. Some people say, well, I met somebody and they told me this thing, and I said, that just makes sense. And it kind of inspired me to keep on. It's hard to remember these things because they probably, who knows when that happened or if it did happen, but anything you remember, like anyone saying to you, this is,
So
you're,
not specifically like one thing. Well, there's when I started playing bluegrass, somebody said to me, "Don't stop playing." So that would be a musical thing where somebody was just like, "Don't, like, your job is to keep playing, don't stop playing." And so that's honestly stuck with me even when I didn't know what I was doing. But my classical teacher um, was a consummate like professional. You know what I mean? Like he was, and it was, you show up, you show up on time, you show up prepared, and you make sure like your ducks are in a row, no matter what you're doing, right? Like, but that's how he approached his professional music career. That's how he expected all of us to approach our instruments and our training. Um, and I think that's something that is lost on a lot of people. I won't tell you how many times I've had a musician show up after the gig has started. No, and it's like, what do you like? There's a downbeat in classical music. Like you have to be in your chair and tuned and ready for that downbeat. And there's a certain level of professionalism that goes into, musical training, the classical world, that if you're just coming up playing music, that I don't think that sticks with a lot of people. And if you're picking it up or somebody says something to you, um, I think you can pick it up. But great. I've seen a lot of great musicians that just have, they're not on time and they're not prepared. And um, so I feel like that's the thing that stuck with me, that's kind of kept me, I continually moving through this, where probably would have dropped off a long time ago or not been called or um,
yeah. I mean, if you're a bass player and you show up on time and are halfway decent, you're going to get calls because, right, bass players are in demand. And if you're there before anybody else and you're ready to play, I have the same thing. Like we have a jam set up, and then sometimes the bass player comes 15 minutes late. Well, without the bass player, it's kind of hard to play bluegrass. I mean, you can stumble along, but once the bass player starts playing that one note, boom, everything just takes off. So I agree with you. A lot of people just don't have that discipline, I guess, for whatever reason. It's
Right.
important.
And but that's something that it was, I mean, very early in my music career that was an expectation to, be on time, be prepared, and be, know what you're doing.
So if you could have sat down and played some tunes with anybody in music history, you and your bass and somebody else, any idea who that might have been? Dead or alive?
Oh boy.
Like who's on your bucket
Would
list?
I have to be good enough to play with them? That's
Well, just a wish thing, like just hanging around the living room and somebody showed up, whoever it might be, and you sat down and played some songs together.
yeah, I feel like if I could actually hang with the folks, I would love to play with Vassar.
Mhm.
Um, I would love to sit in that Old and in the Way crew. I mean, their stuff wasn't always great, but the music they made was truly music. And if we want to go classical, like Yo-Yo Ma would be amazing to sit down and play with. Um, let me think a minute. Yeah, I mean, those are probably my picks. Like
Okay.
if I sat and thought about it a little longer, I could probably give you a list of probably 20 people, but um, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean,
It's funny. Itzhak Perlman, who's a legendary, fantastic player, is
yeah.
playing fairly locally pretty soon. And my wife and I were thinking of going, but the tickets are so expensive for this stuff. I mean, I understand, but like they start at $160 and go to like $400.
Is he doing a recital? What's he playing?
Recital, I think it's a recital.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, that
Should we go? I
I
mean,
mean,
you're not going to get to see him much longer. Even
I
he's
would I
80s.
would go I
Plays.
would go see him. He played a Pittsburgh Symphony Gala one year with the orchestra. I mean, he's actually a pretty frequent soloist in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Um, and man, he's so good.
Okay.
It's worth it. And and
Talk me into it.
he's actually like a great klezmer and bluegrass player. Like he can play all the styles. So if he's doing a recital like him, like just him as a recital, you might actually get some stuff that's a little outside of that classical box.
Okay. Thank you. So looking back at your life in music and otherwise, anything you would have done differently? I'm guessing you probably would have started playing bluegrass earlier, but maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's worked out pretty well to date. So like, I, I would change a few things, and that is I'd probably branch out, not necessarily bluegrass, but I'd try to figure out a little sooner and start playing some things a little sooner that weren't classical music. Um, you know, I I could have gone to the jazzers at Duquesne and been like, show me what you're doing, like show me this. And I didn't. So I probably would have done that. I probably would have dipped into jazz a little more. I don't think at this point in my life, people are like, oh, you should learn jazz. And I'm like, dude, they're thinking in the next county with their phrasing. Like my theory isn't that fast. Like I don't think in my old brain um, is good enough to get that good. So definitely jazz would be like probably the first foray alongside, or maybe even instead of classical music. And I would have stuck with the piano when I was 6
Mhm.
and been like a really good harmonic structure player and really understand soup to nuts, like end to end of that keyboard, what happens when you shift and move one note. And, again, my theory training is it was classical, here, analyze a piano score, here, analyze this piece of music, sight sing this line. There was no practical application. So to have that keyboard knowledge along with a single line instrument playing
Uh-huh.
would absolutely have changed my playing regardless of I think what genre I fell into.
Yeah. It's funny because I teach the bluegrass classes and I'm self-taught musician. I play by ear. But I do know the piano keyboard and I know keys in theory and all the chords and blah blah blah. And I can't imagine playing any instrument really well without knowing something about that. I mean, I guess people do. There's bluegrass guitarists that can play like crazy. They don't know a chord on the piano from anything. But to me, it seems like makes it so much more logical when you see it all in front of you. It all makes sense. Harmonies and everything makes sense.
Right. And that's, my my music theory knowledge that I have. I mean, I had to study it for 4 years, so I have a good basis of music theory. I just I've now that I'm actually playing music off a book, and having to hear and understand the structure now is practical application. Practical application when I started my instrument would have been awesome. So, because that's what jazzers do. They're applying that theory every day to everything they play. And classical players don't. It's like you play your bass and then you do your theory, and you play your bass and you do your ear training and you play.
Mm.
At least when I studied music, that's how, curriculums were structured. So,
Yeah. Interesting because I've played with a lot of violin players in bluegrass ensembles and jams, and a lot of them don't have any idea what chords are, how chords move. I said, well, it's in C, and you go to a G, and say, well, I don't know what's a G on a violin. I said, well, here's the chord. You hear it? No, I never really learned how to hear chords. I just play the violin, which seems to be a kind of a lacking in music education. I mean, I know you want to learn to play classical pieces, but it seems like you should have some ear training, something to know about like what things are sounding like and how they could sound. I don't know. That was
yeah,
my
I mean, we do ear, we study, you know, ear training and we
yeah.
study theory, but never do you bring your instrument into that room while you're studying it and
Uh,
actually apply it to what you're doing here. Everything is like you read the page and then, you know, there's no in my bass, in my bass scores, there's no chord over top of those to see like, oh, well, here's I'm playing the line, but that's actually an E, or I'm playing the line and that's actually the B, and that's, like you would like a lead sheet or something. So that type of practical, like aural application to your instrument, doesn't happen. So I'm sure their theory's fine. They just just don't know
yeah.
how to get around their instrument doing it. And it,
Right.
it and it takes a long time to do that. That's one of the things I still struggle a little bit with is like I know how to get between all the chords now because I've done it long enough. But if a key I don't normally play in, I'm slow. Like I'm like, oh, ooh, yeah, no, that works. Oh, that doesn't work. So, GDA, all the the standard bluegrass keys are great, but pop me into like E flat or C sharp, and I'm like, I don't know how to get around these these changes because I don't play them all the time. So, um, somebody puts a capo on, and you're like, I got to play along with, oh, C sharp minor. Okay, well that works. That doesn't work. Like the patterns aren't there for me to be able to apply the change of the chords into the
Mm.
the pattern on the neck. So um I think it's probably a bigger struggle for classically trained musicians than it is anybody else trying to make that transition.
Yeah. I mean, guitar players, as you say, have the capo, so key changes are not really a big deal for guitar player. But for everybody else, I've been playing mandolin for a year now because I needed it in my class, and as you say, G, C, D, E, not that hard. B flat, some of these keys, you really have to practice them because you have to know the fingerings. It doesn't make any sense, and it's like, boy, I missed the capo.
I don't know. I've seen people put a capo on a mandolin. I know it's a
No,
taboo thing, but
can't do that.
I actually just bought a mandolin last year because I'd like to drive a sports car someday. So I thought, well, I should get a mandolin and like learn how to play this little thing. And um, it's been eye-opening to learn patterns on an instrument that I have no relationship to prior to that instrument. And it's cool. You just slide up and down and over in the, it's I'm loving it. Now this pick thing you guys do, I don't know all about that pick thing. It's like holding a
Oh,
tennis racket, but
anyway, well, is there any last question you want to answer that I haven't asked you yet, or we've been going here for a good hour and plus? Anything we didn't touch on? You didn't talk much about your new project. Maybe you want to say a word about it, but
yeah, I mean, you touched on it.
yeah.
But yeah, so I released an EP, I guess 2 weeks ago, maybe 2.5 weeks ago now. It's called Bluegrass Love Songs Volume 1. and that's volume one because volume two involves usually a river where someone's demise is met. I introduce the love songs on stage and I say, sing Bury Me Beneath the Willow. And I'm like, well, this is a volume one love song because everybody stays alive at the end. It's just the despair songs are the volume one, which is, the three singing songs on there are definitely heartbreak songs. And, the musicians make me sound great on the album. It's Becky Bowler playing fiddle, Dee Dee Weiland playing guitar, Murphy Henry playing banjo, and Rainey Miyake from Sister Sadie's playing mandolin. So just a powerhouse of women musicians and, like pioneers in their fields too. So.
Well, you're a good singer. Like I say, I like the way you did that Stanley Brothers song.
Oh, thank you.
It's just it's a nice, simple, straightforward version of it. And it's the song to sing because it's not too overly done, as I was saying before. People are overdoing music all the time in bluegrass, and just play simply and let the song shine.
Well, singing simply is kind of where I am in my singing. That's, it's a new endeavor. So about 5 or 6 years of singing and 30 years of playing the bass. So we got to balance that out a little better.
Gotcha.
Future.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you very much, Trish, for coming on. It's been fascinating talking to you. I really admire your bluegrass work, and I wish you luck with your bluegrass performances and your next album. And I don't know if you ever get up here to play, but maybe someday. Maybe
One of these days.
We'll see.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on. This was awesome. It's great talking to you.
Okay. And I'll send you a link to the interview when have it all set.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Trish. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed our podcast, and thanks for listening. Visit our website, guitartownct.com, for concert and podcast schedules, or just to send us a message. We'd love to hear from you.